What if the secrets to learning weren't invented yesterday, but were passed down through generations, refined over thousands of years? Picture this: a classroom where the teacher doesn't just lecture, but engages students in lively debate, a method perfected in ancient Athens. Or a lesson where respect and discipline are woven into every word, echoing the teachings of Confucius in ancient China. These aren't relics of the past, they're living traditions, still shaping minds today. Across continents and centuries, certain educational practices have proven so powerful, so timeless, that they've outlasted empires, survived revolutions, and continue to thrive in our modern world. Think about the last time you learned something truly meaningful. Chances are, it wasn't through rote memorization or passive listening. It might have been a moment of discovery, a question that sparked curiosity, or a conversation that challenged your thinking. These experiences connect us to something far older than we realize. The Socratic Method, born in the bustling agora of Athens over 2,000 years ago, still fuels classrooms where critical thinking is prized. The meditative focus of Buddhist monastic education, designed to cultivate deep concentration, finds echoes in today's mindfulness exercises for students. These traditions endure because they tap into something universal about how we learn, grow, and make sense of the world. This video is a journey through 30 of these enduring educational traditions, each a testament to the ingenuity of ancient cultures. We'll explore how the storytelling techniques of indigenous elders fostered communal knowledge, how the apprenticeship models of medieval guilds laid the groundwork for hands-on learning, and why the rhythmic chants of Vedic scholars in ancient India still influence memory techniques today. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're proven tools, adapted and reinvented across time. By understanding where these methods came from, we can appreciate their lasting power and perhaps even rediscover ways to enrich our own learning. So let's step into the past to uncover the wisdom that still educates, inspires, and transforms us in the present. Imagine sitting in a circle, not to receive answers but to uncover them through the art of conversation. This is the heart of the Socratic Method, where the teacher's role isn't to dictate truth but to ask the right questions, ones that unravel assumptions and spark new ways of seeing. Picture Socrates in the Athenian marketplace, engaging passers-by with simple yet probing inquiries. What is justice? Can virtue be taught? His goal wasn't to lecture but to reveal how much we don't know, a humility that becomes the first step toward real understanding. Today, this ancient practice thrives in modern law schools, where professors grill students not to intimidate but to train them in spotting logical gaps and constructing airtight arguments. It's why courtroom dramas feel so riveting, the back and forth, the relentless pursuit of clarity, all rooted in a 2,000-year-old tradition. But the Socratic Method isn't just for courtrooms or philosophy seminars. Think of a child asking why the sky is blue, or a team at work dissecting a problem by challenging each other's viewpoints. Every time we resist settling for easy answers and instead dig deeper with thoughtful questions, we're channeling Socrates. The power lies in its simplicity. No textbooks, no memorization, just the belief that wisdom emerges through dialogue. Even tech companies use this approach in brainstorming sessions, proving that ancient techniques can fuel modern innovation. What makes this method timeless is its respect for the learner's mind. It doesn't impose ideas but trusts that people can reason their way to insight. In a world flooded with information, the Socratic approach reminds us that critical thinking isn't about having all the answers. It's about mastering the art of asking the right questions. Long before the word character education entered modern school curriculums, ancient Chinese classrooms were already mastering the art of shaping virtuous minds. Confucius, teaching over 2,500 years ago, believed true learning wasn't about cramming facts but cultivating moral excellence. Picture students in Imperial China memorizing texts like the Analects not just to recite words, but to internalize principles of respect, humility, and social harmony. At the heart of this tradition lies a radical idea: knowledge without virtue is meaningless. What made Confucian education so revolutionary was its focus on relationships. 5 key bonds formed its foundation: ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, elder and younger siblings, friend and friend. Each relationship came with mutual responsibilities, teaching that personal growth happens through our connections with others. A child learned filial piety not through stern lectures, but by observing elders' rituals at family shrines. A scholar proved his integrity not by acing exams, but by demonstrating loyalty and righteousness in daily life. These weren't abstract concepts but living practices, reinforced through poetry, music, and even the precise way one poured tea for guests. Today, echoes of this ancient wisdom appear in surprising places. Japanese schools still begin mornings with whole class cleaning, instilling collective responsibility. South Korean students bow deeply when greeting teachers, embodying respect that transcends generations. Even Western schools adopting social-emotional learning programs unknowingly mirror Confucian ideals, emphasizing emotional intelligence alongside academic skills. The enduring power of this tradition lies in its recognition that education must nourish both the mind and the heart. Perhaps the most striking modern adaptation is Singapore's National Education Program, which explicitly blends Confucian values with civic lessons. Students discuss real-life ethical dilemmas, weighing personal desires against community needs, a direct descendant of Confucius's teachings about balancing individual cultivation with social duty. In an age of standardized testing, these ancient principles remind us that the true measure of education isn't just what we know, but who we become. Deep in the forests of ancient India, education wasn't confined to classrooms or rigid schedules, it was a way of life. The Gurukul system thrived on a simple yet profound principle: learning happens best when teacher and student share not just lessons but daily existence. Picture a young disciple gathering firewood at dawn, tending to crops alongside their guru, then sitting under a banyan tree to discuss philosophy as the sun sets. This wasn't just schooling, it was a transformative journey where knowledge flowed as naturally as the river beside their hermitage. At the heart of this tradition was the guru-shishya relationship, a bond far deeper than modern teacher-student dynamics. A guru wasn't merely an instructor but a spiritual guide, responsible for shaping the student's intellect, character, and even their daily habits. Lessons spanned the sacred and the practical, from memorizing Vedic hymns to mastering archery, from debating ethics to learning herbal medicine. The Gurukul recognized that true wisdom couldn't be compartmentalized. It required nurturing the whole person. Remarkably, echoes of this ancient model persist today. Think of elite music conservatories where students live with their maestros, absorbing technique through observation and imitation, or modern apprenticeship programs in trades like carpentry or culinary arts, where skills are passed down through hands-on experience. Even the residential houses of British boarding schools, with their emphasis on communal living and mentorship, owe an unconscious debt to the Gurukul ideal. But perhaps the most striking modern parallel is the resurgence of holistic education movements. Schools emphasizing outdoor learning, mindfulness practices, and project-based collaboration are rediscovering what Gurukuls knew millennia ago. that education thrives when it's woven into the fabric of life. In Japan, the centuries-old Terracoya temple schools similarly blended academics with moral instruction, while today's forest schools in Scandinavia let children learn biology by wading into streams, much like Gurukul students studied ecology by living in harmony with nature. The enduring power of this tradition lies in its rejection of the artificial divide between learning and living. When a Gurukul student chanted Sanskrit verses while grinding grain, they weren't just multitasking, they were embodying the idea that knowledge without application is hollow. In an age of standardized testing and screen-based learning, this ancient wisdom whispers a timely reminder: the deepest lessons aren't just absorbed but lived. What if the key to a truly educated mind wasn't specialization, but mastering how to think, argue, and perceive the world through multiple lenses? That's precisely the vision behind the Trivium and Quadrivium, an educational framework so robust that it shaped Western learning for over 1,000 years. Picture a medieval scholar in a candlelit scriptorium, moving systematically through grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the Trivium's 3 pillars, before ascending to the Quadrivium's mathematical arts. This wasn't just a curriculum, it was a carefully crafted journey to cultivate both eloquence and analytical precision. At its core, the Trivium trained students to wield language with surgical skill. Grammar laid the foundation, teaching not just rules of syntax but how to decode meaning from texts. Logic followed, sharpening the mind to spot fallacies and construct airtight arguments. Then came rhetoric, the crowning glory, where students learned to persuade, inspire, and adapt their message to any audience. Together, these disciplines transformed learners into thinkers who could dissect ideas and articulate them with clarity. It's no accident that modern law schools, debate clubs, and even political speechwriting still operate on these ancient principles. The Quadrivium, meanwhile, elevated students from words to the very fabric of reality. Arithmetic wasn't just about numbers but the philosophy of quantity. Geometry revealed the hidden order of the physical world. Music, studied as mathematical harmonics, unlocked the relationship between sound and mathematics. And astronomy connected earthly knowledge to the cosmos. This wasn't STEM education as we know it today, but something far more profound. A study of how mathematics underpins everything from art to the movement of planets. When Renaissance polymaths like Leonardo da Vinci painted masterpieces while inventing flying machines, they were standing on the shoulders of this integrated tradition. Modern universities might have swapped parchment for laptops, but the legacy of this system is everywhere. Liberal arts colleges still champion broad-based learning, resisting narrow specialization. The great books programs at institutions like St. John's College faithfully echo the Trivium's textual immersion. Even coding boot camps unconsciously mirror its structure. First mastering programming syntax, grammar, then debugging logic, and finally architecting elegant systems, rhetoric. The most striking revival, though, is in classical education movements, where students as young as 10 analyze Shakespeare's grammar, dissect Socrates' logic, and reenact Cicero's orations. What makes this framework timeless is its recognition that tools of thought transcend eras. The Trivium's focus on critical thinking anticipates our fight against misinformation, while the Quadrivium's interdisciplinary approach mirrors today's breakthroughs in fields like quantum computing or bioacoustics. In an age of information overload, these ancient arts offer something radical, not just what to learn, but how to learn. They remind us that education isn't about filling a bucket, but lighting a fire, one that has burned brightly for centuries. For tens of thousands of years, beneath the vast skies of Australia, Aboriginal elders have gathered children around crackling fires to share stories that do far more than entertain. These narratives, passed down through an unbroken chain of generations, form one of humanity's most sophisticated teaching systems, where every tale is a carefully crafted lesson wrapped in vivid imagery. Picture an elder describing how the kangaroo got its pouch, weaving together animal behavior, land navigation cues, and the importance of caring for others. This is education at its most primal and profound. What makes Aboriginal storytelling so extraordinary is its multidimensional approach to knowledge transfer. Complex ecological wisdom hides within seemingly simple fables. The Dreamtime story of Tiddalik the frog teaches water conservation, while the Seven Sisters narrative encodes astronomy lessons about the Pleiades star cluster. Survival skills become unforgettable when learned through the adventures of ancestral beings, their mistakes and triumphs mapping directly to real-world consequences. A story about hunters pursuing emus might secretly teach tracking techniques, seasonal patterns, and even moral lessons about respecting prey. The brilliance lies in how these layers operate simultaneously, engaging listeners emotionally while imparting practical and spiritual knowledge. Modern science now confirms what indigenous cultures knew instinctively. Stories activate our brains differently than lectures. Neuroscientists find that narratives stimulate multiple regions simultaneously: emotional centers, sensory cortexes, and memory networks, creating deeper, stickier learning. Contemporary educators harnessing this power often don't realize they're employing a 50,000-year-old pedagogical technology. First Nations communities in Canada use digital storytelling to preserve language. Maori elders in New Zealand teach marine biology through creation myths, and Australian schools blend Dreamtime stories with Western science units on biodiversity. The resurgence of storytelling in education reveals something remarkable about human cognition. When medical schools teach diagnosis through patient narratives, or coding boot camps explain algorithms through interactive storytelling games, they're tapping into the same neural pathways Aboriginal cultures mastered millennia ago. Even the corporate world has adopted this ancient practice, with companies like Microsoft using narrative techniques to train employees in cybersecurity, proving that some educational methods transcend time and culture. Perhaps the most poignant modern application is in language revitalization programs. As indigenous communities work to recover endangered tongues, elders record traditional stories with children, merging linguistic preservation with cultural transmission. In these moments, the fire may be replaced by a smartphone screen, but the magic remains unchanged: the human voice, carrying wisdom across generations, turning listeners into keepers of knowledge once more. Centuries before diplomas and degrees defined expertise, mastery was earned not in lecture halls but at the workbench, elbow to elbow with those who had already perfected their craft. In the bustling workshops of ancient Mesopotamia, a young stonecutter would spend years watching his mentors chisel angle, feeling the grain of marble beneath his own fingers, absorbing techniques no textbook could capture. This was education stripped to its essence: knowledge passed through touch, trial, and trust. From Babylonian goldsmiths to medieval guilds shaping Europe's cathedrals, apprenticeship wasn't just a teaching method. It was a sacred transmission of wisdom from one generation's hands to the next. What made this model so enduring was its immersive reality. An apprentice didn't merely study blacksmithing, they lived it, waking before dawn to stoke the forge, learning to read the color of glowing metal, suffering burns before achieving the perfect temper. Mistakes became lessons etched in memory far deeper than any written exam. The medieval guild system formalized this with rigorous stages. After 7 years as an apprentice, a craftsman became a journeyman, literally, one who journeys, traveling to hone skills under new masters before creating a masterpiece to prove readiness to lead their own workshop. This wasn't just training, it was a transformative rite of passage. Today's surgical residencies mirror this ancient model with uncanny precision. Medical students don't learn heart surgery from videos. They stand for hours observing a mentor's stitches, then gradually take the scalpel under watchful eyes. Silicon Valley has unconsciously revived apprenticeship through pair programming, where junior developers write code alongside seniors, debugging in real time. Even celebrity chefs like Gordon Ramsay insist on kitchen hierarchies where sous chefs absorb techniques through endless repetition. Just as medieval bakers' apprentices kneaded dough until their hands understood what their minds couldn't yet articulate. The secret sauce of apprenticeships lies in their multidimensional teaching. A master doesn't just demonstrate skills but models problem-solving instincts, work ethic, and even how to handle failure. When a Venetian glassblower's apprentice shattered an intricate vase, the lesson wasn't about clumsiness, it was about reading the viscosity of molten silica, a nuance only experience could teach. Modern vocational schools preserving this approach, like Germany's dual education system, combine classroom theory with factory floor practice, producing engineers who can both calculate load-bearing formulas and feel when a weld is right. Perhaps the most poignant modern evolution is in the arts. Florence's historic restoration workshops still train apprentices to clean Renaissance frescoes using the same brushstrokes their teachers learned decades prior, each stroke a whispered conversation across centuries. Meanwhile, tech giants like IBM have launched new-collar apprenticeships, proving that even in our digital age, some truths remain timeless. Expertise grows through guided doing, wisdom travels through proximity, and the deepest learning often happens when we're elbow-deep in the work itself. For over 3,000 years, the sacred verses of the Vedas have echoed through time, not etched on crumbling parchment, but carried alive in human memory. Imagine generations of Vedic scholars in ancient India, their voices rising in perfect unison as they recited hymns with such precision that not a single syllable could stray. This wasn't mere rote memorization, it was an intricate science of sound where every pitch, rhythm, and pause held cosmic significance. The verses were preserved through an unbroken chain of teacher-to-student transmission, each recitation a flawless replica of the original. What sounds like an impossible feat was achieved through a meticulously designed system, one that turned the human mind into a living library long before the invention of writing. The brilliance of Vedic recitation lay in its multi-layered safeguards. Complex chanting patterns like the Patha system served as built-in error detection. Some hymns were recited word by word, others backward, some with words interwoven like a braid. If even one syllable faltered during group recitation, the discord would be instantly noticeable. This oral technology was so precise that when the Vedas were finally written down centuries later, scholars found virtually no variations between texts memorized by isolated communities thousands of miles apart. Modern linguists marvel at this achievement, comparing it to preserving a symphony's sheet music through centuries of humming alone. Today, this ancient discipline lives on in surprising ways. Children in Mumbai's Vedic schools still spend years mastering Sanskrit verses through call and response drills, their training mirroring that of medieval monks. But the influence stretches far beyond temples. Memory athletes competing in world championships use Vedic-inspired techniques like the method of loci, visualizing information along familiar paths. Language apps like Duolingo incorporate spaced repetition, a cousin of the recursive chanting methods that kept Vedic verses intact. Even the rhythmic mnemonics medical students used to memorize anatomy, turning complex terms into sing-song phrases, owe a debt to these oral traditions. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Vedic recitation is its insight into cognitive potential. Neuroscientists studying contemporary Vedic scholars have found their brains exhibit extraordinary memory-related activity, proving that disciplined oral training can rewire neural pathways. In Kerala, elderly chanters who have never learned to read can recall over 100,000 words flawlessly, a testament to what focused practice can achieve. As digital storage makes us increasingly reliant on external memory, these living traditions whisper a counterintuitive truth. True preservation begins not in the cloud, but in the depths of a trained mind. The endurance of this practice speaks to something deeper than technique. It reveals how sacred knowledge was never meant to be passive. When a Vedic student internalizes verses through their breath and voice, they're not just memorizing but embodying wisdom. Modern educators are rediscovering this principle through embodied learning, where students grasp abstract concepts by physically acting them out. From multiplication tables set to rhythm to historical events reenacted through theater, the ancient art of learning by heart is finding new life in classrooms worldwide. The Vedas remind us that some knowledge isn't fully known until it's lived, spoken aloud, felt in the bones, and passed forward like a flame in the dark. Among the olive groves of ancient Sparta, boys as young as 7 embarked on an education unlike any other in the Greek world, one where survival mattered as much as scholarship. The Agoge wasn't merely a school but a total immersion in hardship, designed to forge citizens who could endure anything for their city-state. Picture a child sleeping on reeds gathered from the Eurotas River, stealing food to avoid hunger, or standing firm as older boys raided their meager meals, all sanctioned tests to build resilience. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated system where every challenge served a singular purpose: to prioritize the collective over the individual. What set Spartan education apart was its ruthless practicality. While Athenian youths debated philosophy, Spartan boys trained in the art of war, diplomacy, and austerity. They learned to read and write only as needed for military communication. Physical trials like the diamastagosis, where youths endured public whippings without crying out, weren't just tests of pain tolerance but rituals binding them to communal ideals. Even play was purposeful. Team games in the palestra cultivated strategic thinking, while choral dances synchronized movement and discipline, the Agoge's most radical lesson. That true strength lies in self-control, not brute force, a principle embodied in the legendary Spartan restraint of laconic speech. Modern parallels emerge in unexpected places. West Point cadets pushing through beast barracks or Navy SEAL candidates surviving Hell Week echo the Agoge's ethos of overcoming extreme stress. Elite athletic programs, from Olympic training centers to European soccer academies, mirror its blend of physical rigor and psychological conditioning. Even corporate team building exercises, though far gentler, borrow from Sparta's playbook when they strand executives in wilderness scenarios to foster leadership under pressure. Yet the Agoge's legacy isn't just about toughness. Its emphasis on mentorship reveals surprising nuance. Older Spartans guided younger peers, creating chains of knowledge transmission akin to today's buddy systems in martial arts dojos or firefighter training. The tradition of communal dining halls where citizens bonded over simple meals finds its echo in military mess halls and even tech company cafeterias designed to spark collaboration. Critics might dismiss Sparta's methods as antiquated or brutal, but its core insight endures. Resilience is teachable. Modern psychology confirms what Spartan elders intuited, that controlled adversity builds coping skills. Finnish schools, consistently ranked among the world's best, incorporate forest days where children navigate icy terrain, learning self-reliance reminiscent of Spartan youths surviving in the Tagitos Mountains. The key difference: today's educators balance challenge with compassion, proving that ancient wisdom can evolve without losing its power. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the Spartans' understanding of purpose. Every Agoge exercise tied back to protecting the community, a stark contrast to today's often aimless academic treadmill. When modern schools integrate service learning or first aid training, they unknowingly tap into that same principle. Education gains meaning when it serves something greater than oneself. The Agoge reminds us that even the most extreme traditions can offer timeless truth, if we have the wisdom to adapt them. At the height of the Islamic Golden Age, a bustling intellectual hub stood where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers nearly kissed the legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Picture a 9th-century scholar hunched over a Greek manuscript, carefully translating Aristotle's works into Arabic while a Persian mathematician nearby scribbles astronomical calculations, and a Jewish physician debates medicinal theories with a Christian monk. This wasn't just a library, it was a roaring marketplace of ideas where knowledge transcended borders, religions, and languages. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, this institution didn't merely preserve ancient texts, it supercharged them, blending Indian numerals, Persian poetry, Greek philosophy, and Babylonian astronomy into something entirely new. What made the House of Wisdom revolutionary was its radical inclusivity. While European monasteries guarded books in locked chests, Baghdad scholars actively sought out texts from Constantinople to the Indus Valley, paying translators their weight in gold, sometimes literally. The Persian scholar Al-Khwarizmi worked here, giving the world algebra from his book Al-Jabr, and the term algorithm from his name. Meanwhile, the Banu Musa brothers engineered automatic fountains and mechanical devices that foreshadowed Renaissance innovations by 6 centuries. This collaborative spirit birthed breakthroughs in optics, medicine, and geography like Al-Idrisi's world map that remained the most accurate for 300 years. Today's universities unconsciously mirror this model when they host international conferences or establish interdisciplinary research centers. CERN particle physics experiments, where thousands of scientists from over 100 countries collaborate, echo Baghdad's multicultural teams. The open access movement fighting paywalled academic journals champions the same ideal. Knowledge belongs to humanity, not to silos. Even Wikipedia's crowdsourced model owes a philosophical debt to the House of Wisdom's belief that collective intelligence outshines solitary genius. But the real lesson lies deeper than institutional similarities. When a Syrian Christian translator like Hunayn ibn Ishaq could lead teams rendering Galen's medical texts into Arabic while improving upon them with his own annotations, it revealed a truth we're still relearning: diversity fuels innovation. Modern labs producing mRNA vaccines or AI advancements thrive on this principle, merging insights from biologists, computer scientists, and ethicists. The House of Wisdom's ghost lingers wherever people realize that breakthrough ideas rarely emerge from echo chambers. They spark at the intersections, where different worldviews collide and combust into brilliance. Perhaps its most poignant legacy is in endangered scholarship today. Just as Baghdad scholars rescued Alexandrian texts from decay, modern archivists are digitizing ancient manuscripts from Timbuktu to Palmyra, preserving humanity's collective memory against war and time. The House of Wisdom reminds us that civilization isn't built by hoarding knowledge, but by translating it, literally and metaphorically, across the barriers that divide us. In an age of intellectual tribalism, this 9th-century institution whispers a timely truth. Progress begins when we stop fearing foreign ideas and start weaving them into something greater than any one culture could achieve alone. Amid the chaos of Europe's so-called Dark Ages, flickering candlelight in remote monasteries kept the flame of learning alive. Picture a Benedictine monk in a frigid scriptorium, his numb fingers meticulously copying Cicero's speeches onto vellum by daylight, then teaching Latin verbs to wide-eyed novices after Vespers. These cloistered communities became unexpected bastions of education when empires crumbled, operating as Europe's de facto universities, publishing houses, and libraries rolled into one. Their curriculum, centered on the trivium of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, didn't just preserve ancient texts, it forged a disciplined approach to scholarship that still shapes how we engage with ideas today. What set monastic schools apart was their sacred approach to knowledge itself. Every copied manuscript was an act of devotion, with scribes treating errors as moral failings to be scrubbed away through prayer and fasting. The rule of Saint Benedict mandated daily reading periods, creating structured study habits that modern educators would recognize as scheduled revision. When Irish monks like Columbanus established schools across Europe, they brought an innovative twist, teaching both Christian doctrine and classical pagan texts, believing truth could be found wherever wisdom resided. This openness allowed Aristotle's works to survive in Latin translations made by Muslim scholars, then retransmitted through monastic networks, a chain of learning stretching from Baghdad to Bobbio. The physical spaces of these schools quietly revolutionized education. Carolingian monasteries like Tours and Corbie systematized handwriting into the clear Carolingian minuscule script, the medieval equivalent of creating a universal font. Their scriptoria functioned like intellectual assembly lines, with monks specializing in rubrication, binding, or illumination. The famed Book of Kells, with its intricate Celtic knots, wasn't just art, it was a pedagogical tool, using visual splendor to imprint biblical stories on illiterate viewers' memories. Modern libraries, with their quiet study carrels and preservation departments, are direct descendants of these medieval halls. Today's digital archivists unknowingly mirror monastic practices. Project Gutenberg's volunteers transcribing public domain books echo scribes painstakingly copying Augustine's sermons. The slow reading movement, advocating deep engagement with texts over skimming, resurrects the monastic Lectio Divina tradition. Even the concept of citation, meticulously tracking sources, originated in monasteries where scribes noted which manuscripts they'd referenced. The irony is rich. Institutions dedicated to otherworldly contemplation became history's most effective knowledge preservation machines. Perhaps their most enduring lesson lies in the power of routine. Monastic horariums divided days into balanced periods of study, labor, and prayer, an ancient precursor to time-blocking techniques now touted by productivity gurus. When students at Oxford's medieval halls themselves monastic offshoots kept candlelit vigils before exams, they were continuing a tradition of disciplined preparation. In an age of information overload, the monastic model whispers a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to sit quietly with the wisdom of the past, pen in hand, ready to receive and transmit. High in the Himalayas, where thin air sharpens the mind, Tibetan Buddhist monks engage in an educational ritual that transforms grains of colored sand into profound lessons. The mandala, an elaborate geometric design representing the universe, isn't merely art to admire but a multidimensional classroom. Picture monks crouched for days over a single intricate pattern, their metal funnels releasing vibrant pigments grain by grain, each motion a meditation on patience and precision. What appears to outsiders as a sacred painting is actually a masterclass in mathematics, philosophy, and mindfulness rolled into one. The concentric circles teach proportionality, the symmetrical patterns demonstrate geometric principles, and the meticulous construction process itself becomes a lesson in impermanence when the finished work is ritually swept away. This tradition thrives on a radical premise that deep learning engages both the analytical and the intuitive mind. When a novice studies a mandala's structure, they're absorbing Euclidean geometry through their fingertips. The precise angles of a lotus petal or the fractal-like repetition of deities in cosmic layers encode mathematical relationships that Western students might encounter only in sterile textbook diagrams. Yet here, numbers breathe with spiritual significance. The ratio between a mandala's center and periphery might represent the balance between wisdom and compassion, making abstract math viscerally meaningful. Modern neuroscientists would nod in recognition. This spatial philosophical fusion lights up both the brain's parietal lobe for geometry and prefrontal cortex for symbolic reasoning. Today's educators are catching up to what Himalayan monasteries have known for centuries. Montessori classrooms use sandpaper geometric shapes to teach trigonometry through touch, while architects study mandala-inspired blueprints to understand sacred geometry in contemporary design. The Zentangle art therapy movement adapts mandala principles for stress reduction, proving that structured creativity can calm the mind while sharpening focus. Even tech companies apply these ancient techniques. Google's engineering teams sometimes solve complex problems through mind maps, colorful diagrams that organize ideas radially rather than linearly, mirroring a mandala's non-hierarchical structure. The most striking modern adaptation might be in medical training. Surgeons preparing for intricate procedures now use mandala coloring exercises to enhance spatial awareness and steady their hands, a practice backed by studies showing improved precision in those who engage in detailed artistic work. Meanwhile, Tibetan monks visiting Western universities demonstrate how constructing sand mandalas builds team cohesion. Each participant contributes to a small section, trusting others to complete the interconnected whole. In boardrooms from Tokyo to Toronto, executives replicate this approach during strategic planning sessions, drawing collaborative diagrams where every department's role fits into a larger pattern. What makes this tradition timeless is its refusal to separate knowledge into rigid categories. When a monk contemplates a mandala, they're simultaneously learning math, honing artistic skill, practicing patience, and pondering cosmic questions. Modern education systems obsessed with standardized testing could learn from this holistic approach. After all, the mandala reminds us that true understanding isn't about isolating facts, but seeing how they interlock to form something greater than the sum of their parts. As the monks know well, sometimes the deepest lessons come not from what we preserve, but from what we release, like sand returning to the earth, leaving wisdom etched in the mind. In the shadow of Rome's towering marble columns, a bustling classroom of young boys and occasionally girls from merchant and artisan families gathered not in grand lecture halls, but in modest spaces called Ludi. Here, under the watchful eye of a literator, students scratched wax tablets with styli, mastering letters and numbers in a system that would feel eerily familiar to modern schoolchildren. The Roman Ludis wasn't just a place of learning. It was the prototype for structured, sequential education that still underpins elementary schooling today. What set the Ludis apart was its deliberate, step-by-step methodology. Students began by tracing letters in sand trays before advancing to wax tablets, then papyrus, a progression mirroring today's pencil grip exercises and lined paper. Arithmetic lessons used the abacus not as a toy but as a serious calculation tool, with problems grounded in real-world scenarios like measuring grain for bread or calculating construction materials. Discipline was strict but pragmatic. Mistakes meant repetition, not humiliation, reflecting Rome's cultural emphasis on precision in law and engineering. The Ludus' greatest innovation, standardization. Whether in Hispania or Syria, Roman children studied the same core texts, creating a shared intellectual foundation across the empire, an ancient ancestor of modern national curricula. The echoes of this system resonate in unexpected places. Contemporary elementary classrooms still use multisensory techniques strikingly similar to Roman sand trays. Think of Montessori's tactile alphabet letters or apps that teach spelling through interactive tracing. The Ludis' focus on functional literacy, preparing students for civic life and commerce, prefigured today's emphasis on STEM skills for economic participation. Even the structure of a typical school day, with its segmented subjects and incremental difficulty levels, descends directly from Rome's model. Yet the Ludus also reveals fascinating contrasts. Roman education was deeply bilingual. Students fluent in Latin often learned Greek from enslaved tutors, a reminder that antiquity's basics were sometimes more rigorous than ours. The absence of rigid grade levels allowed learners to progress at their own pace, a flexibility now revived in competency-based education models. Most strikingly, while modern schools often separate technical skills from moral instruction, Roman students absorbed ethics through daily readings of heroic tales like the Aeneid, blending character education with literacy in ways contemporary social-emotional learning programs are only rediscovering. The Ludus' legacy lives on wherever education balances structure with adaptability. When Finnish schools teach coding through collaborative projects or Japanese students practice calligraphy with meditative focus, they're channeling the Roman blend of practical skill and cultural transmission. The next time a child struggles with multiplication tables, they're participating in a tradition that has shaped minds for millennia, proof that some foundations, like Rome's enduring stones, are built to last. Along the fertile banks of the Nile, where papyrus reeds whispered in the wind, Egypt's temple schools stood as beacons of knowledge long before the word university existed. These weren't just places of worship, but vibrant intellectual hubs where priest scholars decoded the movements of stars, calculated flood patterns, and compounded medicines from the earth's bounty. Imagine a young scribe in the shadow of Karnak's towering columns, his reed pen gliding across a sheet of papyrus as he records celestial observations, a task equally sacred and scientific. Here, the divine and the empirical danced together. Geometry lessons doubled as rituals to honor Thoth, god of wisdom, while anatomical knowledge flowed from both mummification practices and battlefield surgeries. What made these institutions extraordinary was their holistic curriculum. Astronomy wasn't merely about predicting Nile floods, but aligning pyramids with cosmic harmony. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, essentially an advanced textbook from around 1550 BCE, blended arithmetic with temple construction, challenges teaching fractions through problems like dividing grain offerings equally among shrines. Medical training combined herbal remedies with incantations, recognizing what modern science now confirms: belief can potentiate healing. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, detailing surgical techniques for wounds, reveals startling precision, describing the brain's folds and advocating cleanliness centuries before germ theory. This wasn't superstition masking ignorance. It was an integrated worldview where every equation and elixir held layers of meaning. Modern educators might be surprised to find how much contemporary teaching echoes these ancient practices. The spiral curriculum concept, revisiting topics at deepening levels of complexity, mirrors how Egyptian students progressed from basic arithmetic to calculating pyramid slopes. Today's interdisciplinary STEM programs, merging engineering with environmental science, unknowingly follow the temple model where knowledge flowed freely across categories. Even the Socratic seminars in humanities classrooms find a precursor in the House of Life, a scriptorium within temples where scholars debated metaphysics and morality. The temple school's most enduring legacy, though, lies in their recognition that learning thrives when purpose transcends practicality. A physician treating a farmer's injury wasn't just mending flesh but maintaining the cosmic order. When modern medical schools teach bedside manner alongside biochemistry, or architecture programs emphasize sustainability as ethical duty, they're channeling that same wisdom. The next time you glance at a pharmacy's caduceus symbol or admire a building's golden ratio proportions, you're witnessing threads of a tradition woven millennia ago in the lamp-lit halls of Egypt's temples, where every lesson from the stars to the soil was a hymn to the interconnectedness of all things. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, where causeways crossed shimmering lakes, the Aztecs built an education system that turned boys into citizens through sweat, service, and sacred duty. The Tolpochkali, or House of Youth, wasn't just a school but a crucible where commoners' sons learned that individual greatness meant nothing without community strength. Picture 14-year-olds hauling firewood before dawn, training with obsidian-tipped clubs under veteran warriors' watchful eyes, then spending afternoons repairing temples or cleaning canals. This was education as collective obligation, where every lesson instilled a simple truth: your worth is measured by what you give, not what you gain. What set the Tolpochkali apart was its seamless blend of martial rigor and moral instruction. Unlike the elite Comicac schools that trained priests and nobles, these institutions forged the backbone of Aztec society: farmers who could defend their fields, merchants who understood civic duty, laborers ready to build public works. Students memorized Huhuatlatoli, the ancient word teachings that wove ethics into everyday speech. A lesson on spear throwing might include proverbs about protecting the weak, while farming drills reinforced the sacredness of feeding the community. Modern psychologists would recognize this as embedded learning, where values become instinct through constant practice. The echoes of this tradition vibrate in surprising places today. Singapore's National Service Program, blending military training with community projects, mirrors the Tolpochkali's dual focus. Urban farming initiatives in Detroit that teach teens agriculture while revitalizing neighborhoods channel that same spirit of skill building through service. Even the Peace Corps ethos that hands-on work fosters global citizenship unwittingly honors the Aztec belief that true education happens not in isolation, but in the messy, meaningful space where learning meets lived responsibility. Yet the Tolpochkali's most radical legacy might be its rejection of passive learning. When Mexican-American students in Tucson's Raza studies, program research ancestral irrigation techniques, or organize local clean-ups, they're resurrecting the Aztec model where scholarship and social action were inseparable. Contemporary movements like service learning in U.S. schools, where biology students restore wetlands or history classes document immigrant stories, prove that the Tolpochkali's insight remains vital. Knowledge without engagement is hollow. Perhaps the tradition's greatest lesson lies in its understanding of discipline. Aztec youths weren't punished with detention, but assigned extra-communal labor, an approach modern educators are rediscovering through restorative justice programs that replace suspensions with mentorship roles. When a Tolpochkali student faltered, his corrective wasn't shame but more responsibility, tending the school's gardens, helping younger boys train. In an era of hyper-individualism, this ancient system whispers a timely reminder: education's highest purpose isn't just to fill minds, but to bind communities together through shared purpose and mutual obligation. For 13 centuries, China's Imperial Examination halls witnessed scenes that would make any modern student shudder: candidates locked in tiny wooden cells for days, composing essays on Confucian classics with brushstrokes so precise they could determine a man's entire future. This wasn't just testing, It was a high-stakes ritual that transformed education into the ultimate social equalizer. Imagine a peasant's son mastering the 4 books and 5 classics so thoroughly that he outranked noblemen in court appointments, his calligraphy alone elevating his family from poverty to prestige. The Keju system didn't merely select bureaucrats, it created a cultural obsession with scholarly achievement that still pulses through East Asia today. What made these exams revolutionary was their brutal meritocracy. At their peak during the Song dynasty, the 3-tiered system local, provincial, palace filtered candidates through increasingly grueling challenges. Provincial tests lasted 72 hours straight, with examinees bringing their own food and chamber pots. The top tier, held before the emperor himself, required encyclopedic knowledge of 10,000 characters and the ability to compose poetry on demand. Yet for all its rigidity, the system was remarkably democratic by pre-modern standards. Wealthy families might hire tutors, but any man with rare exceptions could sit for the exams, creating a literate elite drawn from all social strata. Modern democracies didn't invent social mobility through education. China perfected it a millennium ago. The echoes of this system vibrate in today's high-pressure testing cultures. South Korea's Sunung College entrance exams, Japan's examination hell prep schools, and even Western standardized tests like the SAT all descend from the imperial model. The infamous Gaokao in modern China, where 9 million students annually compete for university spots, directly inherits the Keju's ethos, a single test determining one's life trajectory. But the influence runs deeper than structure. The Confucian ideal that scholarship confers moral authority still shapes East Asian classrooms, where teachers command reverence unheard of in the West. Yet the imperial exams also reveal timeless tensions in education. While they rewarded memorization and formulaic writing, true innovators often failed. The brilliant poet Li Bai flunked repeatedly for creative deviations. Modern educators wrestling with standardized testing's limitations might recognize this dilemma: how to assess competence without stifling originality. Contemporary China's attempts to reform the Gaokao by adding creativity components mirror ancient debates about whether exams measure wisdom or mere conformity. The system's most unexpected legacy might be its paperwork obsession. The meticulous records kept by examination halls, ranking candidates like imperial spice grades, pioneered bureaucratic practices now globalized as GPAs and credit scores. When a Harvard admissions officer pores over transcripts today, they're enacting a tradition refined by Tang Dynasty clerks. Even the concept of teaching to the test has ancient roots. Ming Dynasty prep schools drilled students in past exam essays, creating the world's first standardized curricula. Perhaps the Keju's greatest lesson lies in its unintended consequences. By making classical texts the sole path to power, it preserved Confucian philosophy through dynastic collapses, but also discouraged scientific inquiry that might have modernized China earlier. This paradox still resonates when Singapore tops global math scores but struggles with innovation, or when Western universities prioritize well-rounded applicants over single-minded scholars. We're grappling with the same question that haunted imperial examiners. Can any test truly measure potential? The silent brushstrokes of generations of scholars suggest the answer is as complex as the characters they painstakingly mastered. Beneath the Mediterranean sun, where olive branches cast dappled shadows on white marble, the Gymnasia of ancient Greece pulsed with intellectual and physical energy. These weren't mere athletic grounds but vibrant campuses where young men, and occasionally women in Sparta, trained their bodies and minds in equal measure. Picture a scene where discus throwers pause to debate Socrates' latest paradox, or where a sprinter's cool down includes reciting Homeric verses. This was education as a symphony of movement and thought, a radical departure from the sedentary scholarship of neighboring civilizations. The Greeks understood something modern science now confirms. Aerobic exercise boosts cognitive function, making the gymnasium the original biohacking lab. At its peak, the Athenian gymnasium complex of the Lyceum and Academy offered a curriculum that would make any liberal arts college envious. After morning wrestling matches, students might analyze geometry proofs in shaded colonnades, then transition to lyre lessons that tuned both musical skill and mathematical precision. The famed Palestra courtyards, where athletes coated themselves in olive oil before training, doubled as open-air classrooms for ethics discussions. Even the architecture reflected this dual-purpose: running tracks flanked by libraries, bathing pools beside lecture halls, modern universities with campus fitness centers and mindfulness rooms unknowingly echo this ancient integration, though seldom with the same intentional harmony. The true genius of the Greek model lay in its refusal to compartmentalize. When Plato declared that music and gymnastics were education's twin pillars, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. Musical rhythms were believed to harmonize the soul just as physical training balanced the body's humors. The pentathlon, comprising discus, javelin, long jump, running, and wrestling, wasn't just sport but embodied philosophy, each discipline cultivating distinct virtues: precision, focus, resilience. Today's movement breaks between Zoom meetings or corporate retreats featuring yoga and strategy sessions are pale reflections of this holistic vision. Contemporary research validates what Greek educators observed empirically. Studies show that students who engage in moderate exercise before math tests perform significantly better, while aerobic activity stimulates neurogenesis in brain regions tied to memory. Elite schools like Phillips Exeter Academy, with mandatory athletics and Harkness table discussions, come closest to reviving the gymnasium ideal. Even the surge in movement classrooms, where Swedish pupils solve equations on treadmill desks or Swiss kindergarteners count pine cones during forest hikes, channels the ancient belief that learning happens through the whole body. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the gymnasium is its celebration of amateurism, the idea that every citizen should cultivate both physical and intellectual prowess, regardless of profession. In an era of hyper-specialization where programmers neglect their posture and lawyers skip sleep to bill hours, this Greek wisdom whispers a corrective: true excellence requires tending all facets of our humanity. The next time you listen to a podcast while jogging or brainstorm ideas on a hiking trail, you're walking the sacred grounds where Olympians once trained their minds as rigorously as their muscles. Alone beneath a canopy of stars, a Lakota youth wraps himself in a buffalo robe and prepares to face 4 days without food or water. This is the Hanbal Chayapi, the Vision Quest, a sacred rite practiced by countless Native American nations, each with their own traditions but sharing a common truth. That wisdom often comes when we strip away every distraction and listen to the land's whispers. Across the Great Plains, in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and among the Pueblo peoples of the Southwest, young men and women embarked on solitary journeys to discover their purpose, enduring physical trials that sharpened their senses and opened their minds to guiding visions. Far from mere tests of endurance, these rituals were profound educational experiences, teaching lessons no classroom could replicate. What set the Vision Quest apart was its deliberate use of isolation as a teacher. Stripped of social comforts, participants confronted their deepest fears and insecurities, a process modern psychologists recognize as accelerated self-discovery. The Lakota tradition of crying for a vision involved meticulous preparation. purification in sweat lodges, guidance from elders, and symbolic offerings like tobacco ties. When the seeker finally stood on their isolated hilltop, every rustle of grass or call of an owl became a potential message, training them to read nature's subtle language. This wasn't escapism but hyper-attunement, cultivating observational skills that helped track game or predict whether practical knowledge wrapped in spiritual practice. Today's wilderness therapy programs and outward-bound courses unconsciously echo this ancient pedagogy. When a teenager on a Utah survival course builds her first solo shelter or a corporate team navigates a forest blindfolded, they're participating in a tradition far older than ropes courses and debriefing sessions. Even the solo component of modern Vision Quest adaptations, where participants spend reflective time alone in nature, directly inherits indigenous wisdom about the transformative power of solitude. Yet the Vision Quest's true brilliance lies in its balance of challenge and support. Unlike extreme survival shows that glorify suffering, indigenous quests were carefully scaffolded. Elders set clear physical boundaries, like staying within sight of a sacred mountain, and spiritual guides interpreted visions afterward, ensuring no one faced their revelations alone. Contemporary programs like the California-based Rites of Passage incorporate this model, blending solo time with group processing, proof that the most potent learning happens when struggle meets community. Perhaps the tradition's most enduring lesson is its respect for individual journeys. Where Western education often seeks standardized outcomes, the Vision Quest honored each seeker's unique revelations. A Cheyenne youth might return with a song, a Hopi girl with a clay figurine symbolizing her vision, both equally valid. Modern educators are catching on. Project-based learning and personalized learning plans now recognize that wisdom wears countless faces. When an outward-bound instructor watches students emerge from their solos with newfound confidence, they're witnessing the same transformation indigenous elders observed centuries ago, proof that some truths about human potential transcend time. In the bustling market squares of 12th century Europe, where merchants hawked spices and scholars traded ideas, a revolutionary institution took shape, the medieval university. Picture a roving scholar in Paris, clutching precious manuscripts as he navigates between crowded lecture halls where masters debate Aristotle's newly rediscovered works. These weren't casual gatherings but formalized centers of learning that birthed concepts we now take for granted: degrees, faculty hierarchies, even academic regalia. When the University of Bologna received its charter in 1088, it didn't just create a school, it established a blueprint for intellectual communities that would endure for a millennium. What set these medieval universities apart was their radical reorganization of knowledge. For the first time, the liberal arts divided into distinct faculties: arts, law, medicine, theology, each with prescribed curricula and rigorous examinations. At Oxford, students progressed from the Trivium to Aristotle's natural philosophy, while Salerno's medical school blended Arabic texts with hands-on anatomical observations. The lecture format itself was revolutionary, masters reading aloud from rare manuscripts while students furiously scribbled notes on wax tablets, a practice that evolved into today's note-taking culture. The very word university derives from Latin universitas, meaning a guild, reflecting how scholars banded together like artisans to protect their intellectual trade. Academic freedom became both shield and sword in these medieval halls. When theologian Peter Abelard's controversial teachings clashed with church authorities, students flocked to hear him outside Paris, proving the hunger for independent inquiry. The concept of disputatio formalized debates where scholars defended theses against all challengers, laid groundwork for modern thesis defenses and peer review. Even the iconic gowns and hoods worn at graduations today descend from medieval scholars' attire, originally worn to signify their detachment from worldly concerns. The echoes of this system vibrate in every corner of contemporary higher education. Harvard's house system mirrors Oxford's medieval colleges, where students lived and learned in close-knit communities. The PhD's oral examinations are direct descendants of medieval disputations, while the publish or perish pressure traces back to scholars competing for coveted teaching licenses. Most profoundly, the idea that knowledge should be systematized, tested, and credentialed rather than passed down through familial or religious lines democratized expertise in ways that still shape professional fields from engineering to economics. Yet these institutions also reveal timeless tensions. When Bologna's students formed guilds to hire and fire professors based on teaching quality, they pioneered student-centered learning now championed by modern pedagogues. The medieval practice of lectio close reading and quaestio questioning birthed today's seminar-style classes, though some argue we've lost their dynamic spirit in favor of passive listening. As universities now grapple with online education and vocational pressures, they're reckoning with questions first posed in smoky medieval halls. What is a degree truly worth? How do we balance specialized training with broad wisdom? The most poignant legacy lies in the university's role as knowledge sanctuaries. During the Black Death, when entire villages perished, monastic scribes and university scholars preserved texts that would seed the Renaissance. Today, as digital archives safeguard humanity's cultural memory against wars and disasters, they fulfill the same sacred mission. The next time you step into a university library, with its hushed aisles and centuries-old volumes, you're walking the same path as a medieval scholar, part of an unbroken chain stretching back to those first daring communities who believed ideas could outlast empires. In the narrow streets of Edo period Japan, where cherry blossoms drifted past merchant stalls and samurai residences, a quiet educational revolution was taking place inside unassuming wooden buildings called Terracoya. These temple schools, often run by monks, retired scholars, or even literate townspeople, opened their doors to children of shopkeepers, farmers, and artisans, groups traditionally excluded from elite Confucian academies. Picture a bustling one-room schoolhouse where boys and girls sat cross-legged on tatami mats, their voices rising in unison as they practiced reading with wooden tablets called hiragana tagaki. Unlike the aristocratic education focused on Chinese classics, Terracoya dealt in practical knowledge, calculating abacus beads for rice transactions, composing clear business letters, even deciphering the colorful ukiyo-e prints that were Edo's mass media. This was literacy for daily life, and it laid the foundation for Japan's remarkably high literacy rates even before modernization. What made Terracoya extraordinary was their grassroots adaptability. Each school tailored lessons to local needs. Fishing villages taught tide calculations. Market towns emphasized invoice writing, while Kyoto's Terracoya might include tea ceremony etiquette. The textbooks themselves were works of pedagogical ingenuity. Take Ori, a popular primer, presented moral lessons through fictional family letters, while Jinkoki made advanced mathematics accessible with woodblock-printed illustrations of measuring cups and land plots. Discipline took creative forms too. Misbehaving students might be made to balance inkstones on their heads rather than endure corporal punishment, a practice echoing modern mindfulness techniques that link physical control to mental focus. The legacy of these schools vibrates through contemporary education in unexpected ways. Japan's near-universal literacy, often credited to post-war reforms, actually has roots in the Edo period. Surveys suggest over 40% of boys and 15% of girls attended Terracoya by the mid-1800s, a staggering figure for pre-industrial society. The emphasis on communal learning persists in today's Juku cram schools, where peers motivate one another much like Terracoya students reciting in groups. Even the minimalist aesthetic of modern Japanese classrooms, uncluttered spaces fostering concentration, reflects the Terracoya's deliberate simplicity. Yet the most profound influence might be philosophical. Terracoya operated on the radical belief that education shouldn't be hoarded by elites, an idea that shaped Japan's rapid 19th century modernization. When the Meiji government launched its universal education system in 1872, it built upon centuries of grassroots practice rather than imposing foreign models wholesale. Today, as Finnish schools champion equity or Silicon Valley rediscovers apprenticeship models, they're unwittingly following the Terracoya playbook: meet learners where they are, honor local context, and trust that practical knowledge elevates entire communities. The next time you see a child solving real-world math problems or a teacher adapting lessons to student interests, remember those Edo-era classrooms where education first slipped the bonds of privilege to become, as one Terracoya motto proclaimed, a lantern for all who wish to see. Under the vast baobab trees of West Africa, where firelight flickers against eager faces, a griot's voice rises and falls like the rhythm of the land itself. These master storytellers, known as jelly in some cultures, weren't just entertainers but living libraries, custodians of genealogies, battle chronicles, and moral teachings stretching back centuries. Picture a village gathering where every name, every victory, every hard-won lesson survives not in brittle scrolls but in the cadence of a trained memory. A griot might spend decades apprenticing with elders, learning to weave family histories into epic narratives like the Sundiata, where the rise of the Mali Empire unfolds through poetic verses and the resonant tones of the kora harp. This was history as a sensory experience, where facts merged with proverbs, music, and dramatic pauses to make the past as vivid as the present. What set the griot tradition apart was its dynamic nature. Unlike static written records, oral histories evolved with each performance, adapting to contemporary audiences while preserving core truths. A skilled griot didn't merely recite but interpreted, highlighting parallels between ancestral dilemmas and current challenges. When recounting the wisdom of King Sundiata, for example, they might emphasize his diplomacy during a time of tribal tensions, subtly guiding listeners toward reconciliation. Modern educators would recognize this as culturally responsive teaching, where relevance bridges the gap between tradition and today's realities. The griot's toolkit, call and response participation, rhythmic mnemonics, and emotional storytelling proved so effective that neuroscientists now confirm these methods enhance memory retention by engaging multiple brain regions simultaneously. The echoes of this tradition resonate far beyond West Africa. In Brazil's Quilombo communities, descendants of enslaved Africans preserve resistance stories through oral performances reminiscent of griots. The National Storytelling Festival in Tennessee celebrates the same power of spoken narrative to connect generations. Even digital platforms like StoryCorps, where everyday people record life stories, function as a kind of globalized griot network. But the most profound impact lies in education systems finally acknowledging that history isn't monolithic. When South African schools integrate Zulu praise poetry into literature units, or when Mississippi teachers pair civil rights oral histories with textbook chapters, they're honoring the griot's legacy, that marginalized voices deserve amplification. Contemporary efforts to diversify curricula often unknowingly employ griot techniques. The 1619 project doesn't just present facts but frames them through personal narratives, much like a griot linking individual lives to broader historical currents. Hip-hop pedagogy in Chicago classrooms, where students analyze rap lyrics as modern-day griot storytelling, demonstrates how ancient forms adapt. Even the trend of human libraries, where listeners borrow people to hear their lived experiences, mirrors the griot's role as a living repository. The griot tradition's greatest lesson might be its insistence on holistic truth. Where written histories often prioritize winners' perspectives, griots preserved multifaceted accounts, the cowardice alongside the heroism, the droughts with the golden ages. In an era of polarized narratives, this approach feels revolutionary. When a Malian jelly sings of ancestral migrations, they include both the sorrow of displacement and the resilience of survivors, offering not just information but wisdom. Modern educators grappling with how to teach painful histories could learn from this balance that truth, when sung with integrity, doesn't divide but deepens collective understanding. As dusk falls in a Dakar neighborhood today, children still gather to hear griots recount how their great-great-grandparents resisted colonial rule or negotiated peace between warring kingdoms. The chorus strings hum with centuries of joy and struggle, proving that some knowledge refuses to be confined to paper. It must be spoken, heard, and carried forward in the breath and bones of those who remember. In the sun-drenched courtyards of 15th-century Mantua, where frescoed walls bore witness to a revolution in learning, Vittorino da Feltra's Casa Giocosa, the joyful house, redefined education for a new age. This wasn't just a school but a vibrant experiment where princes and paupers studied side by side, their days blending Homeric verses with horseback riding, geometry proofs with lute lessons. Here, the Renaissance ideal of the universal man took tangible form, a vision where intellectual brilliance and bodily grace weren't competing virtues but harmonious facets of a fully realized human. Da Feltra's radical curriculum placed equal weight on Cicero's orations and archery, believing that a mind sharpened by logic needed a body disciplined by movement to truly flourish. What set these humanist schools apart was their joyful rigor. Unlike medieval scholastics who prized abstruse theological debates, Da Feltra's pupils engaged with classical texts as living conversations. A lesson on Virgil's eclogues might unfold outdoors, with students composing their own pastoral poetry before competing in foot races to embody the pastoral spirit. The trivium of grammar, rhetoric, and logic was taught not as dry formulas but as tools for self-expression. Much like modern liberal arts colleges encourage students to connect Shakespeare's themes to contemporary social issues. Even physical education served higher purposes. Fencing cultivated strategic thinking, while dance lessons taught the mathematical precision of rhythm, blending arts and sciences centuries before STEAM became an acronym. The echoes of this Renaissance model vibrate through today's most progressive classrooms. When Montessori students tend classroom gardens while studying botany, or when New England boarding schools require athletics alongside advanced humanities courses, they're channeling Da Feltra's holistic ethos. The International Baccalaureate program, with its emphasis on creativity, action, and service, mirrors the Renaissance belief that education should shape character as much as intellect. Even the surge in extracurricular coding clubs and maker spaces where kids build robots by day and debate philosophy by night unwittingly revives the humanist ideal of the well-rounded innovator. Yet these schools also reveal timeless tensions in education. Da Feltra famously refused to whip students, insisting motivation should come from wonder, not fear, a principle modern pedagogues champion, though standardized testing often undermines. His inclusion of poor scholars alongside nobility, funded through patronage, prefigured today's scholarship systems, while his rejection of rote memorization in favor of Socratic dialogue anticipates contemporary critiques of teaching to the test. The most striking parallel, however, lies in the Renaissance's revival of classical texts as mirrors for self-discovery, a practice re-emerging in diversity-focused curricula where students see their own experiences reflected in ancient stories. The humanists' most enduring legacy might be their faith in education's transformative power. When da Felter's pupil Federico da Montefeltro grew from a stuttering boy into an erudite duke whose library rivaled the Vatican's, it proved their core belief that cultivation of mind and spirit could elevate individuals and societies alike. In an era of narrow specialization, the Renaissance classroom whispers a radical reminder that true learning isn't about filling buckets but kindling fires, and that the sparks struck 5 centuries ago still have power to illuminate our path forward. In the hushed study halls of Eastern Europe, where candlelight flickered over worn pages of Talmud, a distinctive murmur filled the air, not the monotone of rote recitation, but the vibrant back and forth of intellectual combat. The Yeshiva tradition, perfected over centuries of Jewish scholarship, turned sacred text study into a dynamic battlefield of ideas. Picture 2 students hunched over a single volume, one passionately defending an interpretation while the other counters with a contradictory commentary from the margins, their voices rising as they dissect each word with the precision of surgeons. This wasn't just reading, it was the art of active interrogation, where every syllable invited scrutiny and every assumption faced relentless challenge. At the heart of Yeshiva learning lies the Chavruta system, study partners engaging in vigorous dialogue rather than solitary absorption. Unlike lecture-based models where knowledge flows one way, here wisdom emerged from friction like sparks struck from flint. A typical session might begin with a cryptic passage from the Babylonian Talmud, written in Aramaic and spanning law, ethics, and folklore without clear demarcations. Partners would pass not just the text but layers of medieval commentaries like Rashi's, then contemporary analyses, constructing arguments and counterarguments in real time. Modern cognitive scientists would recognize this as elaborative interrogation, a proven method for deepening comprehension by explaining how and why things work. The brilliance of this tradition shines in its transferable skills. Lawyers trained in yeshivas often excel at spotting loopholes, having spent years tracing legal reasoning through labyrinthine Talmudic debates. Tech entrepreneurs credit their yeshiva backgrounds for honing the ability to deconstruct complex systems, whether debugging code or negotiating venture deals. Even the Talmud's layout, with core text surrounded by centuries of disputing voices, prefigured today's collaborative documents where teams annotate and refine ideas collectively. Contemporary education is catching up to this ancient wisdom. Harvard Law's case method, where students argue opposing sides of legal precedents, mirrors Yeshiva dialectics. Philosophy classrooms adopting communities of inquiry models unknowingly replicate Chavruta dynamics by having children as young as 7 dissect ethical dilemmas together. The most striking parallel emerges in artificial intelligence development, machine learning systems trained on adversarial models, where algorithms debate each other to refine outputs, function as digital echoes of rabbinic scholars sharpening truth through contention. Yet the Yeshiva offers a deeper lesson about the nature of knowledge itself. Unlike traditions that venerate a single authoritative interpretation, Talmudic study embraces multiple valid perspectives through the concept of Elu v'Elu. These and these are both words of the living God. In an era of polarized certainties, this embrace of constructive disagreement feels revolutionary. When a Brooklyn Yeshiva student and her partner spend hours debating whether a medieval ruling applies to modern medical ethics, they're practicing more than textual analysis. They're learning that wisdom often resides in the tension between viewpoints, not their resolution. The Yeshiva's endurance testifies to a profound understanding of human cognition. We don't truly own ideas until we've wrestled with them. As dawn breaks over Jerusalem's stone alleys today, the same animated debates that once echoed in Vilna and Volozhin continue, proving that some methods of thinking withstand the erosion of centuries, not despite their complexity, but because of it. High in the Andes, where thin air makes parchment crumble and humidity devours ink, the Inca Empire built an educational system that defied conventional tools without a single written word. Their solution, the quipu, a cascade of knotted cotton and llama wool cords that transformed mathematics and history into tactile, three-dimensional lessons. Picture a young administrator in Cusco, fingers flying across dozens of dangling strings, tying precise clusters of knots to record grain harvests, astronomical events, or even the heroic deeds of past rulers. What appears as simple fiber art was actually an advanced mnemonic device, capable of encoding complex narratives through variations in knot position, cord color, and twist direction, a binary-like system centuries before computing. The pedagogical genius of quipus lay in their versatility. Different colors represented distinct categories: yellow for gold, red for soldiers, green for crops, while knot clusters functioned as base 10 calculations. A teacher might use one chord set to demonstrate population statistics, then rearrange the same strings into narrative sequences recounting myths or battles. This multimodal approach engaged both logical and spatial intelligences long before modern educators coined the term. Recent studies suggest some quipus may have encoded phonetic elements too, challenging our very definition of writing. The Spanish conquistadors, failing to decipher them, dismissed quipus as primitive tally systems, a tragic underestimation that led to countless being burned as pagan artifacts. Today's classrooms are rediscovering the quipu's untapped potential. Math teachers from Lima to Los Angeles use replica quipus to teach place value, transforming abstract numerals into something students can touch and manipulate. Special education programs find knot-based systems help dyslexic learners grasp sequencing without struggling with written symbols. Even computer science professors draw parallels between quipu knots and modern coding languages, where layered commands create complex outputs from simple binary inputs. The Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City recently hosted a workshop where children recorded their family histories on quipus, proving that ancient technologies can still spark creativity in the digital age. Beyond practical applications, the quipu offers a profound philosophical challenge to how we define knowledge transmission. Western academia often privileges text over other forms of encoding, yet Andean cultures maintained an empire spanning thousands of miles without alphabetic writing. Contemporary researchers collaborating with Quechua communities are uncovering how quipus didn't just record data but facilitated dialogue, much like a professor's lecture notes prompt discussion. In rural Peru, elderly Quipucamayok's keepers of the knots still demonstrate how to read the chords aloud, their rhythmic recitations blending numbers with oral history in ways that blur the line between spreadsheet and poetry. The most poignant revival is happening in cultural preservation efforts. As indigenous groups reclaim ancestral practices, young Peruvians are learning to make quipus from elders, not as museum pieces but as living tools. A collective of Andean women recently adapted the system to document climate change impacts, using distinct knot patterns to track shifting planting seasons and disappearing glaciers. Their work reveals the quipu's enduring strength. Unlike fragile hard drives or fading ink, these fiber networks, when properly cared for, can outlast centuries while keeping stories alive in a format that demands interaction rather than passive consumption. What makes this tradition timeless isn't just its ingenuity, but its democratizing potential. Where literacy once served as a gatekeeper to knowledge, Quipus offered an alternative path, one where shepherds could audit imperial warehouses and teenage messengers could memorize epic narratives through tactile patterns. In an era where education increasingly happens through screens, the Quipu whispers an invaluable lesson. Sometimes the most advanced technology isn't the one that replaces human connection, but the one that deepens it through shared hands-on discovery. As the cords pass between generations, they carry more than data. They weave a living reminder that intelligence manifests in countless forms, and true learning begins when we stop privileging one form above all others. In the shadow of the towering Jame Mosque of Isfahan, where turquoise tiles shimmer with geometric perfection, the Persian Madrasas of the Islamic Golden Age buzzed with a revolutionary idea that devotion and discovery weren't opposing forces, but intertwined paths to truth. These weren't mere seminaries, but vibrant intellectual ecosystems where students might analyze Quranic verses in the morning, debate Aristotle's physics by afternoon, and observe planetary movements through astrolabes at night. Picture a 12th century classroom in Nishapur. A white-bearded scholar sketches Euclid's theorems on a wooden tablet while referencing verses about celestial order, his students tracing connections between mathematical proofs and divine harmony. This seamless fusion of sacred and secular knowledge produced polymaths like al-Biruni, who calculated Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy while also penning profound theological treatises. What set these madrasas apart was their institutionalized respect for multiple ways of knowing. The House of Wisdom model, imported from Baghdad but refined in Persia, organized studies into concentric circles. At the core stood religious sciences like fiqh, jurisprudence, and tafsir, Quranic exegesis, but radiating outward were mathematics, medicine, and even music theory. The legendary Nasir al-Din al-Tusi founded the Maraghe Observatory under madrasa patronage, where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish astronomers collaborated to revise Ptolemaic models, their breakthroughs later influencing Copernicus. Unlike European medieval universities that sometimes treated science and theology as rivals, Persian madrasas framed them as complementary, a mindset modern educators might recognize in today's dialogues between evolutionary biology and spirituality. The pedagogical innovations emerging from these schools were staggering. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, taught from Isfahan to Cordoba, introduced clinical trials and quarantine concepts centuries before Western medicine. Persian madrasas pioneered peer review through Ijaza system, where scholars granted licenses to teach only after rigorous public examinations. Their libraries featured innovative cataloging methods, with books shelved by subject in dedicated niches, an ancient precursor to the Dewey Decimal System. Even the architecture reflected their philosophy. Courtyards designed to cast precise shadows for astronomy lessons, acoustically optimized prayer halls doubling as music theory classrooms, and calligraphy adorned walls where mathematical patterns demonstrated God's creative order. Contemporary education is rediscovering this integrative approach. Universities like Qatar's Education City deliberately place theology faculties alongside cutting-edge science labs, encouraging cross-pollination. The Science and Religion courses at Oxford and Harvard explicitly trace their lineage to Persian madrasa debates about free will and natural laws. Even secular institutions promoting STEAM science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, education unknowingly echo the Persian model where algebra and artistry flourished under one roof. Yet the madrasa's most profound legacy might be their epistemic humility. While medieval Europe often framed doubt as heresy, Persian scholars like Al-Ghazali wrote extensively about the limits of human understanding, arguing that faith and reason could coexist through constructive uncertainty. This intellectual generosity allowed figures like Omar Khayyam, simultaneously a poet, mathematician, and astronomer, to thrive. In an era of polarized discourse where scientific and spiritual worldviews are often falsely dichotomized, the Persian Madrasas whisper an alternative vision. That true wisdom lies not in choosing between disciplines, but in discovering how they illuminate each other. The next time you visit a planetarium and hear how Islamic astronomers mapped the stars while preserving ancient Greek texts, or when you encounter a hospital ward blending spiritual care with evidence-based medicine, you're witnessing the living echo of those Persian classrooms. Their greatest lesson wasn't just in what they taught, but how they taught it, proving that the mind's thirst for logic and the soul's yearning for meaning aren't rivals, but fellow travelers on the same endless journey toward understanding. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a Viking longhouse, a young warrior presses his knife into a birch slab, carefully carving angular symbols that tell of Odin's sacrifice, hanging 9 nights on Yggdrasil to seize the secrets of the runes. These weren't mere letters but vessels of power, each stave humming with mythic significance. Across Scandinavia, from Danish fjords to Swedish burial mounds, Norse cultures turned literacy into a multisensory art form, teaching through carved poetry on amulets, weapon handles, and even cobblestone streets. The runic alphabet, or Futhark, served as both pragmatic tool and sacred bridge between worlds, a tradition where learning to write meant unlocking the hidden layers of the cosmos. What set runic education apart was its visceral connection to material and myth. Unlike quill and parchment scripts, runes demanded physical engagement. Students chiseled them into wood, bone, or stone, their hands learning language through resistance and grain. Each of the 24 original Elder Futhark symbols carried triple meanings: a sound, a concept like fehu for both the F sound and cattle/wealth, and a mythological association. To carve answers, the rune of divine inspiration was to invoke Odin's breath, etching Thorisaz called upon Thor's protective hammer. This layered pedagogy transformed literacy into an act of cultural preservation, where every stroke reinforced Norse cosmology. Modern linguists marvel at how Viking traders adapted runes, fluidly adding new characters for English sounds when settling in Britain, or simplifying them into staveless runes for faster messaging, proving ancient adaptability meets modern efficiency. The echoes of this tradition resonate in unexpected places today. Swedish schoolchildren still practice runstav carving, connecting to heritage while honing fine motor skills. Fantasy authors like J.R.R. Tolkien borrowed runic systems for dwarven scripts in Lord of the Rings, while neuroscientists confirm that tactile learning, like carving while memorizing, enhances retention by engaging multiple brain regions. Even the cryptic nature of runes finds parallels in modern cryptography classes, where students decode messages just as Viking youths interpreted kennings, poetic riddles like wave steed for ship. Yet runes reveal deeper educational wisdom about symbolic thinking. Viking mentors didn't just teach letter shapes but encouraged pupils to read between the lines, literally. The same runestone might convey a funeral inscription to the casual observer, but hidden beneath, bind runes merged characters could spell secret names, and the carving direction might indicate a protective spell. This multidimensional literacy prefigured today's media literacy lessons, where students learn to detect bias in headlines or subtext in advertisements. When a Norse child composed a droppa, a skaldic poem with intricate alliteration and meter, they weren't just showing off vocabulary, they were training their minds to hold multiple layers of meaning simultaneously, a cognitive workout modern educators aim for with interdisciplinary projects. The resurgence of runic studies speaks to their enduring power as cultural anchors. In Iceland's Árni Magnússon Institute, scholars preserve rune-inscribed sagas that blend history with mythology, much like contemporary teachers use historical fiction to make the past visceral. Meanwhile, Scandinavian heavy metal bands encode album art with runic messages, proving ancient scripts can still spark rebellion and identity. The next time you trace your finger over engraved initials in a tree, you're participating in a tradition far older than parchment, one that reminds us writing isn't just about recording words, but about leaving marks that endure both on surfaces and in souls. Deep in the jungles of the Yucatan, where howler monkeys' cries echo through ancient pyramids, Maya scribes bent over bark paper books, painting wisdom in vivid pigments that defied time. These codices weren't mere manuscripts but sophisticated intellectual instruments, combining precise astronomical charts with ritual calendars, medical remedies, and dynastic histories in deerskin accordion folds. Picture a cat on 20-year period ceremony where a priest astronomer unfurls a codex to predict Venus' next appearance, its glyphs correlating celestial cycles with planting seasons and sacred rites. The Dresden Codex alone contains tables tracking lunar eclipses with accuracy rivaling modern calculations, proving the Maya developed abstract mathematics and positional astronomy centuries before Europe's scientific revolution. What makes these surviving texts extraordinary is their layered communication system. Maya glyphs operate simultaneously as phonetic signs, logograms, and semantic indicators. A single symbol might represent a syllable, an entire word, or even a metaphorical concept depending on context. The Madrid Codex's section on beekeeping, for instance, uses cab glyphs meaning both honey and community, weaving practical instruction with philosophical undertones about collective labor. This multidimensional literacy allowed scribes to encode complex ideas economically. A single page could integrate a star chart, ritual instructions, and historical footnotes through intricate visual hierarchies modern infographic designers would envy. The codices' near-total destruction makes their survival even more poignant. When Diego de Landa, a zealous Spanish bishop, ordered thousands burned in 1562 as devil's work, only 4 major codices escaped annihilation, hidden in caves, spirited away to Europe as curiosities, or preserved through sheer luck. The Paris Codex was rediscovered in a library chimney corner, its water-stained pages still bearing calculations for New Year ceremonies. Modern archaeologists using spectral imaging have since uncovered ghost text palimpsests where scribes recycled pages, leaving traces of earlier writings now being recovered through multi-spectral analysis. These fragile survivors testify to what was lost. Estimates suggest over 10,000 codices existed pre-conquest, forming libraries that could have rivaled Alexandria's. Contemporary scholars are decoding these texts with tools the original scribes couldn't imagine. The recently authenticated Grolier Codex, once dismissed as a forgery, was verified through carbon dating and pigment analysis to be the oldest surviving Mesoamerican book, created around 1230 CE. Linguists collaborating with modern Yucatec Maya speakers have cracked previously indecipherable passages, like the Dresden Codex's snake numbers, revealing advanced calculus techniques. Perhaps most remarkably, traditional calendar keepers in Guatemala still consult replica codices to maintain the 26,000-year Mesoamerican long count calendar, proving this isn't dead knowledge but a living tradition. The codices' greatest lesson lies in their resilience as knowledge vessels. When Hurricane Isidore flooded Yucatan villages in 2002, local teachers prioritized saving facsimile codices over textbooks, recognizing them as irreplaceable cultural anchors. Digital humanities projects now preserve these texts in interactive formats where hovering over a glyph reveals pronunciation, meaning, and cosmological significance. As climate change threatens global archives, the Maya codices remind us that preserving knowledge isn't just about storage but transmission, ensuring future generations can still hear the voices of those who painted wisdom on bark paper under the watchful eyes of the stars. In the gilded drawing rooms of 18th century Paris, where candlelight glinted off porcelain teacups and the air hummed with intellectual electricity, a revolution in learning was brewing, one that required no university chair or royal decree. The Enlightenment Salons, hosted by brilliant women like Madame Geoffrin and Julie de Lespinasse, turned private homes into vibrant hubs of discourse where philosophers, scientists, and artists rubbed elbows with merchants and diplomats. Picture Voltaire holding court beside a young seamstress, both debating the nature of human rights over delicate cups of chocolate, while a self-taught naturalist sketched anatomical diagrams on the back of a playing card. This was education without borders, where the only admission ticket was curiosity and the ability to hold one's own in a battle of wits. What made these gatherings radical wasn't just their content but their structure. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of academia, salons operated on principles of egalitarian exchange. Hostesses skillfully guided conversations to ensure the shy botanist received as much airtime as the famous essayist. Topics ricocheted from the physics of electricity to the morality of colonialism, with Diderot's encyclopedia often serving as both reference and provocation. The Parisian salonière Marie-Thérèse Geoffrin famously imposed time limits on rambling speakers, a practice modern facilitators would recognize as ensuring equitable participation. These weren't passive lectures but intellectual jam sessions where ideas were stress-tested through polite but piercing interrogation, a far cry from today's polarized social media echo chambers. The legacy of these salons pulses through contemporary knowledge-sharing spaces, book clubs dissecting the latest Pulitzer winner over wine, and cheese unknowingly emulate Madame du Châtelet's gatherings, where Newton's Principia was analyzed chapter by chapter. Online forums like Reddit's Ask Historians or Clubhouse discussion rooms function as digital salons, democratizing access to expertise while maintaining ideally civil discourse. Even the TED Talk phenomenon, with its blend of performance and pedagogy, owes a debt to salon culture's belief that complex ideas deserve elegant presentation. The key innovation, then and now, is recognizing that transformative learning happens not in isolation, but in the friction between diverse perspectives. Perhaps the most striking modern parallel lies in science communication movements, when Neil deGrasse Tyson explains astrophysics to late-night TV audiences, or YouTube educators like Hank Green break down biochemistry through song. They're channeling the salon spirit of making specialized knowledge accessible and engaging. Citizen science projects, where amateur astronomers classify galaxies from home computers, extend the Enlightenment ideal that discovery belongs to everyone. Even the Café Scientifique movement pub-based discussions with researchers proves that 3 centuries later, people still crave learning environments where a pint and a particle physics debate pair perfectly. The salon's true genius was their social alchemy, transforming education from solitary absorption into collective meaning-making. When a 21st century podcast host interviews a Nobel laureate and takes questions from listeners worldwide, the resulting dialogue would feel familiar to Denis Diderot, whose encyclopedia project crowdsourced knowledge from thinkers across Europe. As we navigate an age of information overload, these Enlightenment gatherings whisper a timely truth. The best antidote to misinformation isn't more data, but spaces where ideas can be thoughtfully examined together. The next time you find yourself losing hours to a spirited debate about AI ethics or climate solutions, remember, you're participating in a tradition that once changed the world, one conversation at a time. Beneath swaying palm trees on the shores of ancient Hawaii, where volcanic slopes meet the endless Pacific, the hula emerges not as mere entertainment but as a living library, one where every sway of the hips, every flick of the wrist, and every syllable of Oli chant encodes generations of knowledge. Imagine a kahuna teacher guiding students through the precise angle of an extended arm, a motion that traces the path of a migrating humpback whale while simultaneously recounting the voyage of ancestral canoes from Tahiti. This is education woven into the body itself, where dance becomes a multidimensional language conveying everything from medicinal plant properties to cosmological truths. The hula's pedagogical power lies in its seamless fusion of physical and intellectual disciplines. Traditional hula kahiko, ancient hula, follows strict protocols. Each movement corresponds to specific words in accompanying chants, creating a kinesthetic mnemonic device. When a dancer's hands mimic rainfall, then sweep downward like water flowing through taro patches, they're not just performing but internalizing the interconnectedness of ecosystems. The chant Kauai might list dozens of freshwater springs across the islands, with gestures mapping their locations, effectively turning geography lessons into muscle memory. Modern cognitive science confirms what Hawaiian kumu teachers knew intuitively. Combining movement with verbal information enhances recall by activating both motor and language centers of the brain. What makes this tradition extraordinary is its holistic curriculum. A single hula like Ea Ainuanu Ko Inoa teaches botany through gestures depicting native ferns, ethics through allusions to land stewardship, and history by recounting King Kamehameha's unification of the islands. The rhythmic ipu gourd drum beats mirror the cadence of Hawaiian language, reinforcing linguistic patterns even for non-native speakers. This embodied approach extends to instrument making. Students learn astronomy by observing moon phases to determine when to harvest gourds, then apply geometry when calculating drumhead tension. Contemporary educators are awakening to hula's untapped potential. Hawaiian immersion schools use hula to teach STEM concepts, the physics of wave motion encoded in undulating dances, or the math behind traditional fish pond aquaculture systems illustrated through spatial formations. Neurologists partner with kumu to study how hula improves balance and memory in Parkinson's patients, while language revitalization programs report faster vocabulary retention when words are paired with gestures. Even corporate trainers adapt hula's whole-body learning for team-building exercises where colleagues communicate through movement rather than words. Yet the hula's greatest lesson may be its insistence on context. Before learning a single step, students study the Malilo story behind each dance, its historical figures, its connection to specific landscapes, its layers of kaona metaphorical meaning. A seemingly simple love song might secretly honor a hidden freshwater spring, with gestures only fully understood by those who know the land. This approach challenges modern education's tendency toward fragmentation, where literature, history, and ecology are taught as separate subjects rather than threads in a single vibrant tapestry. As sunset paints the sky over Haleakala today, hula halau schools worldwide continue this ancient knowledge transmission. From Tokyo to Geneva, dancers memorize genealogies stretching back 30 generations through chants, while their footwork traces the migratory routes of ancestral navigators. In an era of digital overload, the hula offers a radical alternative wisdom that can't be cloud stored but must be carried in the bones, breathed through the voice, and passed forward with reverence. When a dancer's feet stamp the earth in the sacred Pahu rhythm, they're not just performing, they're echoing centuries of educators who understood that some truths are too vital to be confined to parchment and too powerful to be taught without the heart's full participation. In the candlelit courtyards of 13th century Konya, where the scent of roses mingled with the murmur of prayers, a whirling dervish paused mid-spin to recite verses that would echo across centuries. Rumi's poetry wasn't just art, it was a transformative curriculum where every metaphor became a doorway to divine wisdom and every couplet a lesson in love's alchemy. Picture students gathered not with scrolls and ink but with open hearts, absorbing truths about human nature through the story of a chickpea laughing as it boils. They're not torturing you, they're giving you flavor. Or the parable of elephants groping in the dark, each describing the same beast differently. These weren't abstract riddles but visceral teaching tools designed to bypass rigid dogma and awaken direct experience of the sacred. What set Rumi's tradition apart was its embrace of paradox as pedagogy. A single poem might compare God to both a mirror and the sun, inviting listeners to wrestle with apparent contradictions until their minds expanded to hold both truths. His Masnavi, a 6-volume epic called the Quran in Persian, interwove fables, jokes, and intimate dialogues, proving spiritual education needn't be solemn to be profound. When Rumi wrote, "Be melting snow, wash yourself of yourself," he wasn't crafting pretty imagery but prescribing a method, ego dissolution through surrender, mirroring Sufi practices where students learned by serving soup in monasteries before ever discussing metaphysics. Modern psychologists recognize this as indirect suggestion therapy, planting ideas through stories that bypass resistance, much like parables in cognitive behavioral therapy. The living legacy of this tradition astonishes. 8 centuries later, Rumi remains America's best-selling poet, his verses tattooed on skin and etched into wedding vows. But beyond bookstore shelves, his pedagogical influence thrives in unexpected places. Addiction recovery programs use his guest house poem, "Welcome every guest even if their sorrow's violent sweep," to reframe trauma as teacher. Interfaith dialogues employ his metaphors of many rivers reaching one ocean to bridge divides. Even secular mindfulness apps feature his lines about silence as the language of God, repackaging ancient contemplative techniques for digital natives. The secret lies in his approachability. Unlike dense theological tracts, Rumi's words work like sugar-coated medicine, delivering hard truths with disarming charm. Contemporary educators are rediscovering the power of this poetic model. A high school philosophy class in Chicago analyzes Rumi's 2 kinds of intelligence to contrast memorized knowledge with innate wisdom. Medical schools use his imagery of wounds as light passages to teach empathetic patient care. The most striking adaptation might be in conflict resolution workshops, where warring parties translate his line, "Beyond right and wrong, there is a field, I'll meet you there," into practical dialogue techniques. These applications reveal the genius of Sufi pedagogy. By embedding lessons in beauty, they bypass intellectual defenses and speak directly to the soul. Perhaps Rumi's greatest gift to education is his insistence on joy as a sacred tool. Where many traditions emphasize suffering as the path to growth, his verses celebrate laughter as spiritual scouring powder and love as the ultimate teacher. When modern therapists prescribe gratitude journals or laughter yoga, they're channeling his ancient insight that lightness can be as transformative as solemnity. As the whirling dervishes still demonstrate in their radiant rotations, sometimes the deepest lessons come not through strenuous effort, but through surrendering to the music, letting the heart's innate wisdom pirouette beyond the mind's limitations. In an age of standardized tests and career-driven learning, this mystical tradition whispers a radical reminder: true education isn't just about filling minds, but about setting souls ablaze with the unquenchable fire of wonder. Florence, 1466, a 14-year-old Leonardo da Vinci stands in the shadow of his master Verrocchio's workshop, watching as the artist mixes pigments with one hand while adjusting a mechanical clock with the other. This wasn't just an art studio, but a Renaissance innovation hub where brushes and blueprints shared equal space, where apprentices learned to sculpt marble by morning and calculate pulley systems by afternoon. Leonardo's education under Verrocchio embodied a radical idea: that creativity thrives when disciplines collide, when the hand sketching angelic faces also dissects human cadavers to understand the musculature beneath. 5 centuries before the term STEAM entered modern pedagogy, this workshop was already proving that art and science aren't rivals but partners in unlocking the world's mysteries. What set Leonardo's apprenticeship apart was its relentless curiosity across boundaries. While other studios focused narrowly on technical skills, Verrocchio demanded his pupils engage with optics to master chiaroscuro, study anatomy for lifelike sculptures, and even dabble in engineering to design theatrical sets for Medici festivals. The famous Baptism of Christ painting, where Leonardo's angels so outshone his masters that Verrocchio supposedly quit painting, wasn't just a triumph of brushwork. Its ethereal light effects came from teenage Leonardo's experiments with camera obscuras, blending physics and art to cheat perspective. His notebooks reveal the workshop's true curriculum: pages of swirling water studies adjacent to schematics for flying machines, botanical sketches beside geometry proofs, a symphony of interconnected inquiry. Modern STEAM initiatives unknowingly channel this Renaissance spirit. When MIT's Media Lab pairs computer scientists with musicians, or when high school students program robots to paint abstract canvases, they're walking the path Leonardo paved. The polymathic approach has surprising cognitive benefits. Studies show that students who engage in both arts and sciences develop stronger problem-solving skills, as alternating between analytical and creative modes builds mental flexibility. Architecture schools still emulate Leonardo's method of sketching endless variations on a theme, whether designing a chapel dome or a wastewater system, proving that iteration fuels innovation across fields. Yet Leonardo's greatest lesson might be his embrace of productive failure. His notebooks brim with half-finished inventions and mistakes, parachute designs that wouldn't work, anatomical drawings with misplaced organs. These weren't embarrassments but stepping stones, evidence that mastery comes through daring to bridge domains imperfectly. In a Milanese classroom today, children building Rube Goldberg machines that blend art and physics are learning what Verrocchio taught: that the space between disciplines is where magic happens. As Leonardo himself scrawled in one margin, learning never exhausts the mind, especially when it refuses to stay in prescribed boxes. From the Socratic Method's relentless questioning to the Hawaiian Hula's embodied storytelling, these 30 ancient traditions reveal a profound truth about learning. It's never just about memorizing facts, but about shaping how we see the world and our place within it. Each method, whether it's the Confucian emphasis on moral relationships or the Persian Madrasas' fusion of astronomy and theology, offers more than historical curiosity. They provide living blueprints for educating the whole person. Consider how the Gurukul system nurtured both herbal medicine and spiritual insight under the same banyan tree, or how the medieval guilds transformed apprentices into masters through hands-on struggle rather than textbooks. These approaches didn't separate knowledge into neat, disconnected boxes, but recognized that true understanding emerges when we engage mind, body, and community simultaneously. What makes these traditions so remarkably durable isn't their rigidity but their adaptability. The Aboriginal storytelling techniques that once mapped water sources across deserts now help scientists communicate climate data through narrative. The Yeshiva's vigorous debate model fuels today's most innovative tech incubators, where teams stress test ideas through structured disagreement. Even the seemingly austere Spartan Agoge, with its focus on resilience and service, finds new life in leadership programs that pair physical challenges with ethical dilemmas. Beneath their surface differences, all these methods share a common thread. They treat learners not as empty vessels to be filled, but as active participants in crafting meaning. This legacy challenges many modern assumptions about education. In an era of standardized testing and shrinking attention spans, the Vedic recitation tradition shows how deep focus can etch knowledge into memory without a single screen. As artificial intelligence reshapes workplaces, the Renaissance workshop model, where art and engineering were inseparable, reminds us that human creativity thrives at the intersection of disciplines. Perhaps most urgently, the Griot's art of weaving history with moral instruction offers an antidote to today's fragmented information landscape, where facts often float untethered from context or consequence. The invitation these traditions extend isn't about recreating the past, but about reimagining how we might learn today. Picture a classroom where students engage in Socratic dialogues about algorithms, or a corporate training that incorporates Hula's embodied storytelling to teach environmental stewardship. Envision medical schools adopting the quipu's tactile symbolism to help students visualize complex systems, or coding boot camps borrowing from the guild system's graduated mastery levels. The possibilities emerge when we stop seeing ancient and modern as opposites and start recognizing them as partners in the endless human project of understanding. As you reflect on these 30 threads in education's vast tapestry, consider which resonate most deeply with your own experiences. Maybe it's the monastic scribe's devotion to preserving knowledge that calls to you, or the Aztec Tolpochkali's belief that learning must serve the community. Whatever sparks your curiosity, that connection points towards something timeless about how we grow and discover. These traditions endure not because they're old, but because they speak to something enduring in how we learn, our need for meaning, our hunger for connection, and our capacity to transform information into wisdom, one generation